game. I don't give a shit every year when they try to tell us that fewer people are watching the World Series. You look at the people at those games, they're having the time of their life. You're watching this thing, and obviously 99% of why I was watching that game last night and feeling sick to my stomach was for my old man, a guy who grew up spent his whole life a baseball fan. And those are the guys that need to be serviced. And I know you feel the same way. Dave is another kid that was, taken to the ballpark when you're younger. It really is about those feelings. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's where the tradition should come in. I was watching that game last night, and I was literally going, let himself have this. I wasn't saying for those kids. I was saying give it to this guy who's now in his 80s and has been a Phillies fan his entire life, watching every game. When I think about baseball and I look at that team, I think of my father. That's some of the greatest memories I've had in my life, is being with my dad at the ball game. I literally can remember first game I ever went to in my entire life. And with my two uncles, remember the first time I ever walked into a baseball stadium. And that is the kind of stuff that really I would love to see him get back to preserving. I really would. Here's the one of the strangest things, and I don't even know if I've even talked about that, but we used to go up, in those days, you could either go up on a bus with the VFW or you could go up with my dad's work, and they would literally have a bus. And I can remember being a little kid, and so little that I was like, could stand up on the seat during the bus ride, and with my head out the window, knowing that we were going to the ballpark, hearing all the guys laughing. Guys were smoking on the bus, smoking cigars, smoking cigarettes, and they would have this giant trash can filled with beer and sodas for the kids. And I can honestly remember that being the coldest drink I ever had in my life. Just being with those guys, hearing them talk and bitch about the game on the way up. After a win, everybody would be laughing on the way back or bitching on the way back. And I really feel like that's 99% of what the whole thing is about. Just a chance for fathers and sons to get together. I remember going to those games with my pop, and then years later, in Florida, I had spring training tickets, which there is nothing in sports like spring training. There is nothing as hopeful and as close to what it can be for playing hooky as sitting there watching spring training games over and over and over. There's literally no pressure to it. The other thing that I was thinking about last night, I used to go up to the games with my pop and my Uncle Bill. And my Uncle Bill was like an old guy at the time. He used to, every game he had this fake radio that was it looked like he was carrying an old-fashioned radio, but it was really hollowed out, and he always had a flask in there, and he would pull the flask out like, where'd this come from? Every single game, he would act like the greatest thing he ever did was to pull that thing out, look around, take a pull off of it, and pass it around. And he was a real baseball guy. And literally, and I never forget this, every single funeral we were ever at, he would say, tough league to get a hit in. Every single time he would say to us, tough league to get a hit in. Because there was nothing that we could say. And I remember being at his funeral, and my dad turned to me and he said, what do you think? Tough league? I said, yeah, it is a tough league to get a hit in. I was really thinking about him last night, too. And thinking about my pop, because he is one of those guys that just is not an angry fan. He's not a guy who really cares all that much about winning and losing. And I busted his balls a few times when the Phillies were really bad, and he'd still follow him. And he would always say, there's always one player that you can watch, even in a bad year. There's one guy that you could say, how did he pull that one off? Look at him. He's moving up. there was always something for him to watch. My dad does, the other cool thing about it is, and this is one of the craziest things that I got to thank radio for, is because of being in radio, I got to play with the Dream Week guys. I did that about 5 years, and it's an unreal experience where you're playing with the guys that you grew up watching. They coach you all week long, and you're playing with other guys that have signed up for this Dream Week experience. And then at the end of the week, you play against the pros. And you're out there, and you're playing, you're pitching against guys who pitched in World Series, and they're all just busting your balls, and you're having a great time. You do the dinner at that night. And one of the great things about baseball is nobody tells funnier stories than baseball players. And they just sit there and rip each other, rip the guys who played. And I was sitting there with my dad, and I was just watching him, rubbing tears out of his eyes because he's laughing so hard at some of these stories, and leaving and having him say to me, I think that was the best night of my whole life. Just the flat-out best night of my whole life. And really, that's exactly the main reason that I was so tense this week, is just letting a guy who's had now the second time his team has won a World Series over his entire life of being a fan. 2 World Series wins he gets, a guy in his 80s. And the other thing about baseball, and I know all the other guys know this too, is that it always does give you something to discuss with your dad on times that you and your dad aren't getting along. I went through my teen years. I left the first time I hit the road. I was 17. And whenever I would call back, whether my dad was happy with me or not, we ended up talking about the ball game. So I had to make sure that I read box scores and checked out box scores, because I knew that was going to come up, and I would know that would be part of the conversation. To this day, in the summer, anytime between February and October, I check the box scores before I call home, because I know at some point my old man and me are going to be talking about those games. It's politics will piss us off. Things I've done in my life will piss us off. Baseball we can still talk about. So I give him a call last night after the last out, and we just kind of go over the entire time I'm just like, let him pull this. Let him just have this win. I got him the Comcast a couple years ago. The man is 83 years old and watches 162 games a year. Does not miss a game. Sits there on the porch watching the ball game, and when that's over, he'll flip over to another one. So I give him a call last night, feeling happy for him. And he's not dancing in the streets. We go over the game. We talked about Utley. We talked about the pitching. We talked about where this season could have went wrong, because he says to me, he goes, in September, we're 3.5 games behind the Mets. I thought that was the end of it. There was no way to get in. And it was a really great thing for me, for the main reason, to have a guy who's 83 years old say to you, that was a really good year, huh? That was a really good year. I would really hope for everybody that you could say to yourself when you're 83 years old, that was a good year. And I would hope for anybody listening too, to have the experience to have your dad still with you when he's 83 years old, and have him say that was a really good year. And my Uncle Bill is right. It's a tough league to get a hit in. But every once in a while, you get a hold of the ball and you fucking ride it out.